On the whole, fan reaction towards the previous episode of Top Gear was divisive at best and vitriolic at worst. The older audience who had picked the show up around the time of its 2002 revival had felt significantly alienated and left with little to enjoy, given the simplification of the episode format from 4 to 5 films per episode of roughly equal length to perhaps just 2 or 3. With an overarching main film, a change which will prove to affect the quality of this series later on, and quite honestly deserves more than just a cursory glance in a series review. Worse still, on the very same night, the Top Gear trio would be lampooned in a repeat of John Coleshaw's Impressions show, containing a sketch centered around the disposal of a large pile of money with what I must personally state is some of the most impressive costume department work I have ever seen for a comedy program at least, and captured the three boys' likenesses perfectly. Doubly so given that Hammond was portrayed by Deborah Stevenson, someone who normally looked like this. Many of those watching felt this skit was endemic of what Top Gear had become since its supposed halcyon days of Series 4 through 10, and laughed harder at that than the electric car challenge. To make matters worse, 4 days earlier the Ministry of Defence would be placed under fire, no pun intended here, for their frequent collaborations with the Top Gear team, a partnership which began in 2003 for the show's third series, lending the programme use of a Harrier jump jet and the HMS Invincible for their various wild and wacky hijinks. Since then, the programme had hired out Apache attack helicopters, Challenger tanks, the finest sharpshooters in all of England, parachutists from the famed Red Devils, the HMS Ark Royal, another jet, this time a Eurofighter Typhoon, a squadron of Spitfires, an entire platoon conducting a mock beach landing with a Ford Fiesta, and whatever the hell this thing was. It was calculated that in those 6 years, military personnel from the MOD had spent the equivalent of 141 days, that's 141 out of 2,200 for those wondering, filming for Top Gear. Since this was during the throes of conflict in Afghanistan, concerns were naturally raised over the lack of equipment for frontline soldiers and why the MOD spent as much time on the programme as they did, with no apparent justification for doing so. For context, in January 2010, it was revealed that the MOD spent over £250 million on recruitment drives and other initiatives such as Armed Forces Day over the previous 5 years. It therefore stands to reason that their work on Top Gear was but a drop in the ocean in comparison, a drop they only had to pay for a single time, and was effectively free advertising, demonstrating some of the cool gear the armed forces had at their disposal, which not only had an entertainment purpose as opposed to your typical 60-second ad break, but would then be endlessly replayed on channels such as BBC Three and Dave for many years to come, as well as getting reposted online. Any expenses the MOD incurred would quickly pay for themselves. On the same weekend as episode 2 was broadcast, the three Top Gear boys would find themselves in Middlesbrough, filming for an upcoming segment that was due to be broadcast later that year. By coincidence, a 22-year-old fan of the show by the name of Christina was in the process of tying the knots and having her wedding photos taken, and beckoned host Jeremy Clarkson over for some photos. Strangely, this was not the first time in the year 2009 where the team inadvertently ended up gate-crashing someone else's wedding, as during the race to the north in Series 13 back in April, the pair of Clarkson and May would also pose for photographs after the former was initially mistaken for someone dressed up as a 19th century chimney sweep. Still on that same Sunday, it would be candidly revealed in an tell-all interview recorded by Express journalist David Stevenson of the struggles host Richard Hammond had overcome in the 3 years since his near-fatal accident in the Vampire jet car ahead of the host's 40th birthday. He'd remark how he wanted to strangle a taxi driver who claimed the accident was a nice piece of publicity, and was generally pleased over how Top Gear continued to evolve, albeit in a later time slot which he felt had cost some of the show's potential audience in regards to those of a younger disposition. He'd revealed that one of the secrets of Top Gear's success and longevity was down to the three presenters taking the mickey out of each other relentlessly. One day later, similar sentiments would be echoed by producer Andy Willman as part of an article penned by Patrick Barkham over how the programme had conquered the world. He covered how the early years were just about being a car programme in spite of low ratings, and that the BBC didn't initially expect all that much before branching out into a more light-hearted entertainment show, one that frequently attracted the ire of critics and censorship boards alike. Much like Hammond, Willman claimed that the show's secret was down to the three main personalities ridiculing each other, and that clever people doing thick people stuff was the reason it had become so successful. In the days leading up to the 29th, worries over comments Jeremy Clarkson made during the Romanian road trip would continue to surface, with the country's London ambassador surprised and disappointed over how Romania had been portrayed, and wishing the broadcast be amended to show the country in a more positive light. This is in spite of the fact the film put the Transfiguration Pass on many a car enthusiast's worldwide radar and undoubtedly helped Romania's tourism industry on a scale no big-budget advertising campaign could ever hope. Indeed, as it would be reported by Top Gear-affiliated journalist Stephen Doby in August 2018, 9 years after the episode was broadcast, driving on the Transfiguration was a tricky thing to do after 10 AM, as the road would end up swamped with tourists who had their phones out in their obligatory rental Sanderos. By the night of Friday the 27th, Jeremy Clarkson would make an appearance on Jonathan Ross's chat show alongside actor Lawrence Fishburne and comedian Peter Kay, with a guest feature from a set of Hawaiian hula chairs. In his interview, Clarkson would proceed to gossip about his increasing public recognition, including a story about two youths in a Renault Clio who revved their engines as Jeremy made his way to the studio that night. He'd mention how he had to be breathalyzed during the filming of their upcoming challenge in Middlesbrough, despite having the crash for televisual purposes and in an otherwise sober state, and couldn't resist plugging his latest home video release, Jewel, which featured a film in which he tasked himself with finding the fastest off-road celebrity. Of course, as any self-professed car enthusiast growing up in the 2000s can attest, and what will probably end up getting this retrospective an invasive little blue box underneath the title, Ross just couldn't resist ending his interview without an obligatory reference to climate change, which he, as did many others at this point, continue to refer to as global warming, which was especially timely given that the much-publicised Copenhagen Climate Change Conference was due to occur throughout December 2009. This remark was made in reference to the amount of hairspray Clarkson must have used in order to film this particular scene on the old pre-2002 version of Top Gear. Said scene aired as part of Series 26, Episode 6 of the programme all the way back in October 1991, and funnily enough, the whole thing was shot as a parody of a PSA starring acclaimed actor Jeremy Irons, presenting a self-indulgent piece to camera that wouldn't go amiss in certain subreddits today, and using many of the same canards that said online communities still use, chiefly the death tolls in car crashes and the environmental impact of cars. Clarkson's response to his fellow Jeremy is scathing and something that honestly deserves to be heard even to this day in the face of the anti-car rhetoric that is gripping certain parts of the internet.
On 40 Minutes next Thursday on BBC Two at 9:30, Jeremy Irons will present a poem by Heathcote Williams. It's called Autogeddon. Within this elegant and eloquent and sometimes frightening prognosis, there is irrefutable fact, there is conjecture, and there is poetry. But the message seems to be clear. The car is a beast that may well one day consume the earth and all who dwell on it. A terrifying thought. But what would the world be like with no internal combustion engine? Would we let the house burn because there is no fire engine? Would we let our loved ones die because there is no vehicle to get them to the hospital? Would we let an Ethiopian starve because there is no truck to get the food from the port? And would we add 1 million or more to Britain's dole queues because there is no motor industry? But there is an inescapable fact. Cars do destroy people's lives. They do maim and they do kill. Or do they? Isn't it more likely to be the people who drive them? Now, Top Gear will continue to campaign for safer cars, but only you can make safer drivers.
We now return to 2009, and on the 29th of November, the third episode of Top Gear's 14th series would breach the airwaves. Its production code was ENAA763F, and its official runtime is given as 1 hour, 1 minute and 14 seconds, although in actuality it runs 33 seconds longer in both the 2009 TV broadcast and the BBC iPlayer version. No cuts were made to the Region 1 Blu-ray release, meaning this version of the episode you watch will always be the same, save for the soundtrack obviously, unless you're not watching a full-length version. As was the case with the previous week, each of the official episode titles were rather lacking in the imagination department and made no reference to the Lancia tribute. Uninspired once more, I decided to consult the water-wasting monolith in the sky, and it came up with something that I think is again utterly genius due to its incorporation of a double entendre: the rise of Caravans and the fall of Lancia. Now, I want to make it plain that this is one of only 3 aspects of my videos out of the hundreds within them that I choose to use AI tools for. coming up with snappy episode titles, creating images that would be difficult or impossible to source online, which I then endlessly alter in Photoshop anyway, or as you'll see in this video, voicing another individual's personal anecdotes, since as much as I would like to if I were to hire even a cheap voice actor for one of my videos through services such as Fiverr, it would end up costing more than these videos earn me every month. There's also of course the services of Adobe Podcast, which I use to master my vocals, but given the fact I'm using a £10 Chinese microphone in a room that isn't at all suited to recording from an acoustic perspective, I personally choose not to count that. One thing I will never do is clone my own voice, because at that point I feel the content I'd make would no longer be genuine. Everything you hear in my videos that sounds like me is me, and genuinely comes out of my own lips. With that little disclaimer out the way, it's time to get on with the main feature. The premise behind this episode is simple. Jeremy Clarkson states that in true action movie franchise form, you can never truly get rid of a baddie, and in the program's case, their perennial baddie was the humble Caravan. Over the previous 6 to 7 years, they had smashed, crashed, burned and tore their way through potentially hundreds of caravans, and yet they remained on the road as omnipresent as ever. Clarkson believes that the Top Gear team might have come up with a solution, and segues into the first film of the night. A film that would end up proving so tricky to make, they had to shoot it twice. In February 2009, the Oswestry-based firm Lindstrand Balloons received a phone call from Top Gear producer Oshin Tiemann. On the other end of the call was Alistair Ritchie, the son of hot air balloon maverick Alex Ritchie. Tiemann's proposal was simple. He wanted to know if it was possible to convert a Caravan into an airship, or rather a hot air balloon that looked suspiciously like an airship at first glance, because if it were an actual dirigible, it would have caused a lot of bureaucratic headaches. To help build this one-of-a-kind machine, Ritchie brought on board his own team, Ritchie Engineering Solutions, as well as the expertise of John Ackroyd, a man that had worked with people such as Ritchie's father on several world record attempts, including the Frost land speed record cars and Richard Branson's Virgin Atlantic and Pacific balloon crossings in the 1990s. In the end, 7 people would be part of the core design team, and these were Ritchie, Ackroyd, Simon Force, Malcolm Crocker, Damon Cheeseman, David Jones and David Price. Construction of this almighty contraption would end up delayed due to the Civil Aviation Authority dictating that the original plans of fitting an airship-shaped envelope over a Caravan and strapping a paraglider motor to the back constituted an airship. So the team at Lindstrand then had to set about converting the Caravan into a proper gondola so it could then be reclassified as a hot air balloon. The CAA would be as cooperative with the team as they could possibly be, understanding that the ship was to be built purely for the purposes of novel entertainment and not enterprise, and eventually things started to fall into place. The goal was to use as light a Caravan as possible, and though Lindstrand initially approached a German firm that made the sort of Caravans the team were looking for, they were quite unsurprisingly rejected. Sensing free publicity that the Germans had willingly left on the table, Staffordshire-based firm Freedom Caravans, the makers of the Microlight range of small caravans, stepped up to volunteer, and construction could therefore begin. It took roughly 4 to 5 months to build the airship, during which the blimp-shaped balloon was handcrafted and sewn together out of a spare envelope used on a project that Lindstrand had just completed at the beginning of the year, which they dubbed as the Flying Carrot, owing to its shape and distinctive shade of day-glow orange. Very little would be required to adapt it for the Top Gear team's plans, with most of the work going into the gondola, space frame and propulsion system. The Caravan would be stripped down to a basic shell and fitted around a welded aluminium space frame, with composite honeycomb panels used to reinforce the floor and other weak areas, in order to minimise the risk of James May randomly falling out of the sky. Computer-aided design would also be used to analyse and navigate around potential technical shortfalls. All of this would be done to account for as many different flight load configurations as possible, as well as provide as much protection as they could in the instance of a crash, which proved to be quite the wise decision. By this point, it was now the summer of 2009, and owing to the myriad of delays the Lindstrand team encountered throughout the build process, the time had since sadly come and gone for the film to form a part of the show's landmark 13th series. Construction of the airship was more or less finished by this point, and the team had now come for a test inflation, during which the CAA and the Top Gear team were present. A small disaster nearly ensued as it pulled the Caravan to the side and nearly ended up cracking its fiberglass shell. The team at Lindstrand needn't have worried, however, as the airship took off without any problems, and by July it was ready to be filmed. Top Gear's set designers then worked on turning the otherwise empty Caravan shell back into something that looked like a Caravan, with various pieces of interior furniture being added to help enhance its look to cameras. With the build now complete and certified as airworthy, scheduling for the film proved rather problematic, as both the Top Gear team and Lindstrand would try to arrange for the other party to meet, only for one or the other to back out. Eventually, the two parties arranged a full block in the final week of September into October of 2009 and got to filming. Otherwise, they'd have been in danger of missing the 14th series of Top Gear as well, and given the hundreds of hours of work that had gone into building and testing the airship, it would have been a shame had it never saw the light of day. Now, although James May was himself a fully trained pilot and depicted in the episode as being the ship's lone captain, it would actually be a man by the name of Chris Sanger Davies who was the unseen pilot behind the overall controls of the airship, just to make sure nothing went wrong. After driving to the airfield in a Skoda towing a Caravan, the ship would gloriously emerge through Cardington Airship Hangar, perhaps the only one to ever do so under its own power, although in true Top Gear fashion it didn't exit cleanly. What followed was probably one of the most surreal scenes of Top Gear ever, even when you learn the magic behind it that went into producing it. May's plan is to land his airship at a Caravan site, and so entrusts Richard Hammond to drive his car for him. And it's not just any car either, it's the Lamborghini Gallardo Valentino Balboni edition. The pair travel around rural England to the sounds of Pink Floyd, with May altering his trajectory several times. Despite naming several Caravan sites, an audience had actually been gathered at the Elderslie Cricket Club near Cambridge in anticipation that May's airship would touch down there. However, due to adverse conditions, these plans were unfortunately nixed, much to the frustration of those who had spent hours waiting for May's arrival. What therefore follows is a tale of classic TV editing trickery. Clips from two completely different shoots have been stitched together to make it seem like one coherent whole. The first half of the Caravan Airship Challenge would be shot on the 29th of September 2009 and would end in a sudden and dramatic form as when the airship attempted to land at the cricket club, wind would drag it along the A428 into a farmer's field, where it crashed.
Mayday!
No! Oh, bloody hell, stop!
Many people believe this to be scripted at the time due to an AAIB incident report not being filed, but it is indeed a legitimate prank that completely curtailed the shoot. From a contemporary report of the era, given by a 37-year-old Peter Clark, a local resident of Elderslie. I was walking through the village and suddenly this giant airship appeared carrying a Caravan. It was a very strange sight. I understand they were planning to land on the village cricket green in the middle of a match. All the cricketers were there dressed in their whites waiting for it to appear, but it started drifting off in the wrong direction. I think the film crew were a bit fed up as they'd been hanging around the village all day waiting for the wind to drop so they could film. After May's accident, the airship took some days to be repaired, although thankfully the damage was very minor, and filming would resume on the 5th of October, 1 week later. This is where the second half of the film comes in. As the winds continue to dictate the airship's path, May ends up encroaching on Norwich Airport, forcing the grounding of several planes while a police helicopter escorted him out of the airspace. Now originally, the plan was to use a different, larger and more well-known airport, as reported on by Pistonhead's user RDE aka Pravo Yazdi. That August, an email was sent from the BBC to the airport RDE represented to get clearance to use that airport along with a different ending than what made it to TV. But these plans were vetoed and Norwich Airport was used instead, since they could shut it down a lot easier and simply because even a show like Top Gear wasn't that big enough to shut down Stansted or Luton for half an afternoon. Unsurprisingly, the whole airport incursion scene was entirely scripted for TV. Otherwise, May would have been slapped in handcuffs and that would have been that. The police helicopter was a prop vehicle, and according to RDE, the code Oscar India 99 was a discrete channel not used in real-life situations, although according to other sources it was a legitimate helicopter designation for the Norfolk Constabulary in the 1990s. Either way, knowing that it's scripted, it's fairly unlikely real police resources would have been wasted on such an endeavour. The Top Gear Caravan airship would actually be licensed as G-Top G and officially decommissioned in May the following year, with the Caravan part donated to Bewley. In 2019, the airship would be restored back to running condition in a rare positive gesture, but unfortunately, by late 2024, it turned out no good deed ever went unpunished, and alongside the Series 11 police cars, stretched Fiat Panda, and ski jumping Mini is one of several beloved Top Gear creations that are sadly no more due to bureaucratic idiocy, years of general neglect, and shameless iconoclasm. Back in the studio, it's time once again for the news. Topics covered this time around include the Zenvo ST1, which somehow devolves into a discussion about catnip, the Dorset family who named their daughter Kia due to the car she was born in and ended up getting a free car, and Clarkson's indignation over a 20 mph speed limit on the motorway after several days on the road. This escalates into a full-blown political rant.
Now, I don't know who the Minister of Transport is, but I want him to find the man who came up with that idea, go round to his office on Monday morning and punch him really hard in the side of his head. Just poof! Because if he doesn't, I'm going to find the man and I'm going to attach him to a milling machine and I'm going to see if it's possible to turn a man's head into a perfect cube.
You're absolutely right. Speed limits on motorways can be a pain, and there's two solutions outlined for you. Revolution or cubing people's heads. Alternatively, you could just leave a bit earlier.
No, cube their heads!
Whilst inquiring if anyone in the audience is from Leicestershire, Clarkson appears to spot a rather special guest in the audience.
Jesus! Jesus is from Leicestershire! He is Jesus! Come here, Jesus, come and talk to me. 10 minutes a day, that's there.
Each way.
Each way, 5 days a week. Yeah. So that's an hour and 40 minutes a week the government is stealing from Jesus.
Strangely, this isn't the first, second, or even the third time this has happened in Top Gear's history, as it previously happened twice in earlier episodes, and a third time during their 2008 live tour.
You won't get in because they built that car.
Jesus is here!
Wow!
Who have we booked as the guest this week? Is he the guest? That would be something, wouldn't it? We'd get some viewers there.
How did you do on the track, Jesus?
At least I'm not too tall for my hair, eh, Jeremy?
Who here would like a Daihatsu coat? Just Jesus is here. Jesus, come and have a look at this and tell us, Jesus
might like a coat.
Jesus is
combat trousers.
Jesus, what's that? It's all. I mean, Jesus, this is supercharged. Your dad gave the world supercharging.
Here comes a VW Passat CC, a kind of four-door, four-seater coupe version. They did as a kind of nod to the Mercedes.
Richard, I've got to stop you there. Jesus is here, look! Whoa! Jesus has come, Jesus!
Wow!
That's so nice of you. Sunday as well. Do you like the Volkswagen Passat CC, Jesus? No. Jesus doesn't like it, everybody!
Before we move on, there was also a 2010 episode of Have I Got News For You that Clarkson guest hosted where he makes a similar comment towards a member of the audience during that year's election debates.
And Gordon Brown scored well there.
Oh, no, we've got... Jesus!
That's the ghost of John Lennon, I'm sure.
It should also be mentioned that Clarkson makes a rather astute observation towards another member of the audience that's very unfortunate in hindsight if you know what happened to Top Gear in the years following Clarkson's departure.
I like the audience. Look at this. You've got Freddie Flintoff, if he was ever to take up murdering.
Going a bit out of order here, but it's well worth doing this for a reason you'll know in a few minutes. There's no other way of putting this. Chris Evans is this week's guest star. For the Americans in the room, or indeed most other countries this carrot-top imbecile holds zero cultural relevance over, this is not Captain America Chris Evans, but rather wannabe funny man usurping sex pest Chris Evans. The man who basically destroyed Top Gear 7 whole years before the BBC finally admitted it. During the practice laps, Evans nearly kills a cameraman.
Get back!
Throughout the rest of his practice laps, Mr. TFI Friday would spin off the show's Lassetti at virtually every corner on the track, until he too required the services of the second car, which had only just been mended from Michael Sheen's earlier antics the week prior.
Yep, it's all my fault. Won't be invited back again. Doesn't matter.
We could only hope.
So you haven't learned your lesson, still going for brute force?
His real lap is much more sedate, and in the pouring rain he comes home in an admittedly respectable 152.5, at this point the third fastest time ever in the wet. Finally, as was teased the previous week, we learn who the car manufacturer with the biggest number of great cars is, at least according to the audience. The winner of the poll is Ford. Now, Ford was actually a very good choice in its own right, because even if you take away the exclusively American side of the operation, ranging from Mustangs to the more humble Model Ts, and focus purely on the British arm of the firm, you've still got a lot of landmark vehicles on your hands. The original GT40, GT70, Escort RS2000, the other Escort RS2000, the RS200, the Sierra Cosworth, and of course the almighty Escort Cosworth. Chuck in the occasional real Capri, Focus RS with a mind of its own, beloved transit van, and even the chintzy car models, which Ford decided to advertise with this, and the Blue Oval had a mighty roster of vehicles that couldn't be beat. A reputation that stretched all the way to even its most humdrum family saloons and commercial vehicles. However, this film was never going to be about Ford, and it was an unusual bait and switch given how straight previous phoning competitions had been played. The decision had already been made well before the competition had even started, and the film recorded a full 2 months before it went to air. The real answer, according to Jeremy, is Lancia, and what follows is actually a really good retrospective into the Italian company that sadly flew too close to the sun and ended up paying the price for it. We start with a brief look at the Lancia Fulvia, the car that really established the Marque's presence on an international scale due to its success in rallying, before taking a brief look at the much older Aprilia, the first car to be designed in a wind tunnel and where Clarkson unwittingly let slip a bold-faced lie.
The doors opened like this, and that was lovely. However, when they were closed, they didn't quite meet, so quite a lot of weather could get inside as you drove along.
Now, contrary to what Clarkson says here, and much to the chagrin of the enthusiasts who were watching, no, the car's door seals didn't let rain in during times it was wet. Next we come to the Lancia Beta. The film's establishing shot is this pile of rusty car parts, which Clarkson suggests is what remains of most Betas.
It was made from steel so thin that on a windy day it would actually change shape. I mean, this was fine yesterday, but then this morning we had a bit of a shower, and now look at it.
He is of course joking here, but what many people watching may not initially realise is that this joke had been shamelessly recycled from Jeremy Clarkson's very first home video, Unleashed on Cars from 1996.
Remember the Lancia Beta? A car made from steel so thin you could read through it. We scoured the land to find a Beta, and this is all we could come up with. Apparently, its owner drove through a puddle once.
And this wasn't even the first time Clarkson said this.
A car made from steel so thin you could read through it.
This is the car in question, the Beta. It was the biggest seller in the Lancia range, which makes you wonder why they made it out of steel so thin you could read through it.
Because the truth is, this entire film was lifted more or less verbatim from a May 1994 episode of old Top Gear and simply given a high-definition 21st century makeover. It mentioned the company's early international breakthrough with the Fulvia, the Beta's rust problems, the Monte Carlo's lack of brakes, capped it all off with the decades of enduring rallying superstardom with the stratospheric Stratos and deadly Delta Integrale, before the company's sad and swift decline once the WRC money dried up and Fiat effectively lobotomized the brand into a company that produced regular Fiats for those who couldn't quite afford an Alfa Romeo but still wanted something different and more upmarket than a car for the common paisan. In the 90s it was the Dedra, and in the 2000s it was the Delta that was a Delta in name only and was otherwise little more than a glorified Punto. In fact, so thematically similar were the two films that they both managed to court controversy due to the manner in which they chose to depict certain cars used in the film, the show falling foul of the car's owners both times, albeit in completely different circumstances. In 1994, the BBC were made to publicly apologise to Lancia enthusiast Arthur Mead after running a fake magnet over the body panels of his cherished Beta, and in 2009 it was allegations that the kit car was depicted dishonestly. Buckle up, because this is one Top Gear controversy you've almost certainly never heard about unless you were active on the Final Gear forums in the late 2000s. Originally, the programme had wanted a real 1970s Stratos in Alitalia colours, but given the short amount of time they had to procure the cars for the piece, as well as the fact no genuine roadworthy Alitalia cars seemed to exist in the UK, the team opted to settle for a Hawk HF3000 replica built by Jerry Hawkridge's esteemed Lancia replica company, a car which proved to be more than quite the handful. In a Pistonheads thread created on the 18th of November 2009, UserGlib reported that Top Gear had recently track-tested the Hawk HF3000, and it didn't take long to transpire that things hadn't gone over as swimmingly as each of the invested parties would have liked. On the former Stratos Super site, here's what Chris Smith had to say about Top Gear's portrayal of the Hawk, and it's not a very positive opinion.
I was there at the Top Gear studio all day and saw everything outside the studio firsthand. Because of my personal view of the program, I refused the offer of participating inside the studio. We know that Nico volunteered his car at very short notice to the people at Top Gear who had asked for an Alitalia. Nico made it abundantly clear in his many emails to them that the car had been standing and had been rallied over the last few years and was a little distressed. They arranged transportation for the car to be collected from Edinburgh and delivered to the studios, where it was filmed with sticking brakes and showing the Stig getting out of the car after it had broken down. But they omitted to report that they had blown the engine. The Stig then leant on the side window and it crashed down. Then the wiper blade dropped off. The Stig walked away. Then they transported the car back to Nico in Edinburgh, declaring only trouble with the brakes, and still not admitting to an engine problem and a broken door, where they had pushed it so far back, it had broken the check strap and cracked the fiberglass edge. This is the point where I came in. I was asked by Nico if I could collect the car from him and put a new engine in, which the BBC would pay for. I collected and fitted the engine and gearbox, piously donated by Ken from his Rothman's car. While I was there, we all three tried to sort out the problems with the brake, to no avail. After rejigging everything, the pedal was restored and we had good working brakes. A late night that night. Early start next morning to load the car and all tools for a shakedown test at Bruntingthorpe. After a couple of slow bedding in laps, the speed was gradually built up and everything seemed okay. My biggest concern was that Nico was unable to keep the car on the track for very long, resulting in some spectacular spins across the grass and once into the tires, narrowly avoiding damage. Owing to Nico's time constraints, no adjustments were made to the suspension in any way, setting of shocks, tire pressures, tracking, etc. On Wednesday, the day of filming, I had to be at the studios by 8 a.m. After offloading the car on its slick tires, I went through the start procedure with them and handed over the keys. Then this week's Stig driver came round, Andy something, I think, and got in the car, started the engine, revving its nuts off, making it bounce off the rev limiter, to which he remarked, "I thought I was pressing the brake." I explained to him that the brake is the next one along, and the clutch the next one after that. Off he shot. For the next hour and a half, I watched through binoculars as they filmed the supposed one power lap. In fact, he drives 2 or 3 laps, and then the camera team moved to the next corner, and he does 2 or 3 more laps, and so on. In all, he must have done 30 plus laps. Then he did the supposed spinning out of control on the power lap. From this, you can see how contrived it all was. My view is that from the outset, this was the direction that the program was going to take. Even if the car had performed spectacularly, they would have still slated it. Nico went into the studio filming and immediately expressed his anger and concern over the way everything had been handled and portrayed, including Clarkson's comments.
Was it built fastidiously by James May over a period of many hundreds of years? Or was it built by a spanner?
My emails and telephone conversations with the BBC were met with media talk, and I was told that they were going to show the footage, and nothing was going to change. Legal action by Jerry and Nico to remove all footage of the car and all references to it have just been sidestepped by the BBC. What have we come away with? Nico has come away with hurt pride. Jerry has had his most excellent product criticized and future worldwide sales jeopardized. And I, although not mentioned by name, everyone knows that I built the car originally, and they would associate its failings with me. Both Jerry and I are absolutely devastated about the program and fear the negative knock-on effect on our businesses. I am personally well known throughout the industry, as is Jerry. I have a meeting with one of my prized customers on Wednesday, and I have 14 of his cars in my workshops. I am dreading what his thoughts will be about me and my capabilities after he sees the program, as he knows that I built the car. I believe that in future, if a car is offered to any influential media for road testing, etc., it is only fair that it should first be vetted and approved by the manufacturer before it goes out. In my view, it is no good whinging about the media if you are going to sit and watch this type of program every week, or indeed go out and buy their books, etc. You are just encouraging them. Take my advice and turn the off and go and read someone else's quality publication instead. Chris.
As a reply to the thread, Guy Croft, the Fiat expert who had worked on the Lotus redesigned Lada in Series 1 and provided the car with an engine, joined the forum to share his negative experiences with the show, stating that he would not work with them again either. Now, this post is quite damning in a multitude of ways, but it's not completely airtight, as Skylock would analyse in their reply over on Final Gear, and to an extent I feel somewhat dishonest and melodramatic. First of all, Chris directly admits that the car wasn't in tip-top condition to begin with, given its distressed condition from being used in rallies and otherwise standing about. He also admitted that its owner and driver, Nico Alonzi, found the car difficult to handle and even damaged it himself before the Top Gear team even had the chance to touch it, after crashing into the tyre barriers at Bruntingthorpe. Given the short time frame Smith repeatedly mentions to get the car ready for TV, as well as the fact no suspension adjustments were made, it's also reasonable to therefore assume that the car was not repaired nor set up to an optimal standard. The fact that the BBC would pay for a new engine up front shows that they were taking accountability for at least one blown engine, but I think it's unfair to put the blame squarely on Top Gear for blowing the first one, because if the car had been driven hardly and then hardly driven for quite a while, it's just as likely the engine was experiencing increased wear or fatigue cycles from its irregular intensive usage and was potentially on its way out anyway. The same applies for a lot of the other parts that Top Gear were accused of breaking. Then there's the bit about the stick, which I personally find very hard to believe, and in amongst the overall anecdote, of which I'm sure was largely heartfelt and genuine, I think was subject to a tiny bit of embellishment from an unreliable narrator. In other words, I think Smith completely made that bit up. There's no reason as to whether or not it was Ben Collins or Andy Prio that a seasoned championship caliber touring car driver would ever make a mistake as elementary as the pedal order, especially not in a car they've likely driven in their career at some point or another. As the car set off for its many practice laps, Smith commented that the engine sounded like it was firing on 5 cylinders as opposed to all 6, which not only shouldn't be happening with a brand new engine, even if it was allegedly revved to oblivion first, but is also a strangely uncertain assertion to make from someone who supposedly knows his stuff. The final part of Smith's post is just weirdly passionate and quite frankly shouldn't be. He thinks that the reputation of himself, Alonzi, and Jerry Hawkridge, the founder of Hawk Cars, were irreparably tarnished by the way the HF3000 was depicted. Now personally, I can't imagine 3 people choosing to end their lives over the way their cars were depicted on a TV show. That speaks to me more about Chris Smith's mental state than insensitivity from the producers of Top Gear that were already overworked in making a TV show that would be watched by several 100 million people. He says everyone apparently knew he built Q516HNR, the car used on the show, and that his professional relationships with existing customers of his would be jeopardized, which I feel is rather unnecessary and egocentric if I dare say so myself. I'd certainly never heard of Chris Smith prior to researching for this video, and I can't imagine many of the other 6.5 million people that tuned in that night have heard of him either. Naturally, the company's website chooses not to make mention of the Marque's appearance on Top Gear, although that's probably more to do with the fact it looks like it was last updated in 1996, but I feel that the fact the company still exists, along with its website, is proof enough that Top Gear's publicity towards Hawkridge's firm was only ever good in the long run, bringing exposure to the firm and perhaps extra sales they otherwise wouldn't have had. No one really cared that the car was depicted as unreliable or built to a poor standard, regardless if it actually was or not. And the fact that no litigation followed the airing of Series 14 is perhaps proof enough of this, and that the 3 central figures in this story ended up swallowing their collective pride. With this film done, the episode of course finishes with the Hawk HF3000 power lap, or rather the 30 attempts it had been pieced together from that made its builders threaten to sue the BBC. After the apparent failure of the first attempt, with Clarkson vowing that the power lap time board's first ever DNF would not go to a Lancia, the Stratos ends up setting an alleged 1:48.2 time, rendering it the slowest car on the board anyway, and in fact a good second or so slower than the quickest celebrity lap times in the Suzuki Liana. From Series 5 Episode 8's laps of the Escort RS2000 and Audi Quattro, we can make an educated guess that the Stratos would have been capable of setting a lap time roughly in the vicinity of 1:32 had the lap not been played for laughs, which would have been enough to nestle it amongst the early 2000s hot hatch crowd. Knowing this, Smith's complaints are at least somewhat justified, albeit certainly not to the extent of threatening litigation or setting up a fraternal suicide pact. In contrast, the online community for the Lancia beta received the film much more positively on average, with some mixed reception here or there, and largely disowned the drama that was going on in the Stratos forum. This was in spite of the fact that the beta was portrayed much more negatively, and that despite several members lending the show access to their cars, including a very well looked after example of the Lancia Trevi, ultimately only the Monte Carlo ended up appearing in the episode. Elsewhere, the episode still received mixed reviews from a contemporary perspective, although perhaps not as venomously negative as the previous weeks outside of the Stratos and kit car fandoms, but still with plenty of criticism amongst all the usual praise. Once again, there was this increasing perception that Top Gear had lost it somehow, even though the episode was much more focused on the car than the previous week. And of course, I can't move on from this part of the Series 14 retrospective without mentioning the race between a Lancia Beta and a Morris Marina to determine who built the worst car during that particular period. The race that ensues is extremely reminiscent of one that had aired 2 series earlier as part of Series 12's Communist Cars film, and unsurprisingly ended with the Marina getting a piano drop on it. An interesting production note is that this is not the real plate for the car. The plate, TCP-70T, had actually been previously used for a Morris Marina that was destroyed in Clarkson's duel, which, yet again, had a piano dropped on the roof. However, the car used in the Lancia film wasn't really a Morris Marina at all, but rather the later Morris Ital with a Marina front end grafted onto the front. This film would turn out to be one of the first things shot for Series 14, with the climactic race shot at Clandelo on the 19th of September 2009. Lead mechanic Alan James would be the first man to discover what had happened to the stricken Morris and put 2 and 2 together in his head after his firm, AJ Motors of Tonner, would be temporarily recruited by the BBC to haul away and dispose of the wrecked Ital Arena. One final Easter egg of sorts concerns Clarkson's co-hosts ridiculing their beloved frontman over how long it would have taken him to get the Stratos around the test track, a ribbing which almost succeeds in eliciting a small giggle from the latter, but he just about manages to hold things together long enough in order to let the end credits run. Not that those are enough to stop James May.
Or no.
On the whole, it seemed Top Gear had regained some of that lost mojo from the previous week, and this is reflected in the fact that the episode's rating on Final Gear was an 8.06 out of 10, marking a significant improvement over the previous week. In terms of ratings, there was also a slight improvement in viewer retention, with a little over 6.5 million people tuning in according to the BARB, and perhaps rather notably 412,000 of these coming from BBC HD after the network encountered such a rocky start. With that said, only 7% of people who watched the episode live did so via high definition, and this figure would steadily improve to a maximum of 25% by 2013, when the BBC would shut down its special HD service in favour of having HD versions of their regular channels. But for those of a more pessimistic outlook, half the battle hadn't even been fought yet. Top Gear still had 4 episodes left to run, and the clock continued to tick down. Speaking of clocks ticking down, I've decided that this series will conclude on the 31st of August. That's right, there's going to be 4 episodes in a row this upcoming month, starting from the 10th. I am choosing to do this in order to make good on a promise I made at the beginning of the year, and to prove to myself that this is something I can do as I gear up for pre-production on my next retrospective, the second of at least 23 total. Once again, thank you all very much for watching, but before I go, there is something I need to get off my chest. There is nothing else in this video beyond this point that would be relevant to you if the future of this channel and indeed my efforts are not something you care about, so feel free to click off here. Now, if you've been following my endeavours for any amount of time, you'll know that for near enough 2 years now, my work has drawn some absolutely bizarre hostility from a former Top Gear scriptwriter, who recently decided to escalate things with some extremely unprofessional comments on a podcast. Personally, I just don't understand what his problem is at this point. I can handle criticism, I can accept being wrong if there's a degree of substantiated evidence. What I won't accept is being publicly mocked by someone who doesn't even know the slightest thing about you as a person. As I've learned over the past few years, my core talent is talking about Top Gear. Since 2020, I've given a huge amount back to the community, and just last week I released a 6,000 image Top Gear photo archive, completely free for everyone to access and which you'd already know about if you were a top tier supporter of the Patreon. The link for this is in the description, and it is, to my knowledge, the most comprehensive public visual archive of the show that exists, full of rare photos and fan-shot moments. And there is a lot more than that on the horizon. But allow me to be perfectly clear. I will not be bullied nor intimidated off this platform. People have a right to discuss Top Gear even if they didn't work on it. That's what having a sizable fanbase entails. Could you imagine someone like Chris Chibnall tracking down and insulting every Doctor Who fan who publicly spoke out against his writing ability? Of course not. Even if I sometimes get details wrong, I'd personally be thrilled if someone spoke so passionately about a project I worked on for over 15 years. I put serious amounts of effort into the research behind every single video I make, but I'm not omniscient. I wasn't in the Top Gear offices. I don't know what happened behind every closed door, and I've never pretended to. When I talk about lesser-known topics such as Beta 6, for instance, I am doing so using public knowledge obtained from headlines and other reputable sources, as opposed to mere anecdote. It's easy to talk about someone like me being talentless or lacking standards, but if he honestly believes that, then he's absolutely free to start his own channel. All he has to do is write some scripts, assemble together a team of editors, and do the exact same thing I do, but to his rigorous standards. No one is stopping him, but Top Gear as a whole is bigger than any one person. It's far more than just a pokey motoring show that aired on BBC Two. It is a cultural phenomenon that is only just starting to transcend the generation it first came out, and will be remembered long after the society it depicted becomes wholly unrecognisable. And what has been happening for the best part of 2 years is not healthy for any community to experience, especially with such a pivotal figure at the centre of it. If someone can't stand the idea of any voice other than his own talking about Top Gear, then that's something they're going to have to learn to live with. And if they do feel the need to resort to making further threats of violence, then I'll make sure they're dealt with by the appropriate authorities. As always, thank you all very much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing to the Patreon or donating via Ko-Fi in order to help fund the production of videos such as this one, or my verbal dismantling of the new Ford Capri if you're one of the 5,000 lucky souls who happens to also be subscribed to my second channel. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, take care.
I'm going to change gear now. This will involve man touching. Tiny cockpit.